I would pick out something for her to read, and she would pick out something for me to read. So we're each going to do a short reading, and then we're going to sort of talk to each other about writing, and then we hope you will all have questions, and we can talk some more about writing and stories. So the piece that Adi picked for me to read is a piece that it's just about a year old. It appeared in New Hampshire Home Magazine in the summer of 2019 when things were very different. And it's a story about berries. So I'll read my berry story. A forager from a long line of foragers, nothing pleases me more than finding wild berries. I will scale a small mountain for low bush blueberries that ripen in high summer, just short of the peak. Sometimes abandoned roads pass a woodlot, clear-cut years before, overrun by blackberries. Wear long sleeves and long pants and don't forget your bucket. My daughter was grown up before she realized that chuckaberries were actually checkerberries. I'm an eyedropper from a long line of eyedroppers. They taste of wintergreen and chalk. Chuckaberries appear just after snowmelt, nestled in small, dark leaves. Evidently, they live under the snow, so they are both the first and the last of the edibles. As a child, I learned which berries to avoid. A dark one on a tall, pale stem, that'll kill ya, my father said. A blue-black cluster like a seed head looked tempting, but it was not for eating. Baneberries, white with red stems, look poisonous and are. Puckaberries, also called chokecherries, won't make you sick, but they will make you pucka. Among the first things my folks did when they bought their house in Boscoin in 1957 was plant raspberries. In my earliest memories, the bushes are laden and I'm reaching up. A ripe raspberry will, with the gentlest touch, fall into your hand. When we bought our house in Northwood in 1978, I planted raspberries. What bliss to step out the back door and pick some for breakfast. Gradually, the wild blackberries choked the raspberries out. Eventually, they too stopped producing, so I mowed them all down. Some years I managed to grow strawberries, though something in our soil doesn't like strawberries, and the yield was meager, nibbled by snakes and chipmunks. And my grandfather, this is a coincidence, William Barker, but it's a different one, I think. At my grandfather William Barker's place, wild strawberries came when he threw ashes from his wood stove. I'd plunk myself down in the stubby grass and eat while the grown-ups visited, tiny berries no bigger than the tip of a toddler's pinky. They stained my hands. My Grammy Stewart kept a diary, spare and to the point. So-and-so visited, good to see him. So-and-so didn't come, missed seeing him. How strange to find myself in those pages. August 1st, 1965, Jean and Bud and children called, referring to my parents, my brother, and me. Brought blueberry pie made from the berries we picked on the power lines in Salisbury. We weren't the only ones. Often another car or two would be parked beside the road. You couldn't see the other pickers. The bushes were too thick, but you could hear them moving. You could hear them talking. We measured our haul by the bottoms full. When the floor of the bucket is covered, that's the first bottom full, with more to follow, one after another. What a disaster when a child trips, the bucket tips, and the berries spill. It's impossible to pick them all up once they've fallen. A scattering on the trail marks the loss. My mother would stop at the first good bush and pick it clean. My father explored, searching for the perfect bush. Once he found the ground all torn up. Wild boar, he said. I kept my eyeballs peeled and my ears open in case it came back. Then came the year the electric company sprayed the power lines and killed all the bushes. They never grew back. Some say New Hampshire has two seasons, winter and not winter. But time can also be marked by the sequence of ripening. Checkerberry, followed by strawberry, raspberry, blueberry, blackberry, then checkerberry once again. The sweetest way to measure the passing of a year of a life. So that's an essay that I wrote for New Hampshire Home Magazine. Thank you for picking that, Audie.
It's so interesting to hear the final version of that because
Oh, right, we did it in our writers group.
And there were so many other stories and other tidbits that got paired away.
Yeah.
Just berries.
We have a writers group in Northwood that's been going for, I don't know, where's Valerie?
Years.
4 years, 4 or 5 years. And we often try out our pieces on the group. We meet every week, even during COVID. We've been Zooming every week, every Tuesday. And it's become a great community and a great bunch of friends. So I picked out for Audie to read a book that is as yet unpublished. I have great faith in. It is called Hercule Poisson, Fish Detective. Is that right?
It is.
And
so,
the age group is?
This is a chapter book. So this is for little kids. I write for young people. I used to just write for teenagers and young adults, and I've been writing more middle grade, which is, we'll talk about that later if you want to, and this is a chapter book, which is for pretty little kids. And it's not published. It's getting, shopped around right now, so fingers crossed. But it's called Hercule Poisson, Fish Detective. And I'm just going to read the first chapter. So this is.
And when you listen, pretend you're 8 years old.
Yeah.
So that means stop drinking the wine. Have a glass of milk. Oh, Audie.
It's water.
Oh, it's water.
Okay, so this is chapter 1. Something fishy in Tide Town. My name is Hercule Poisson. Hercule Poisson. Air, as in the stuff we breathe. I filter air out of the water through my shiny gills. I can tell you are jealous of my shiny gills. I am a master of observation. Pois, as in the kissy sound you make when you're bidding farewell to your mortal enemies. Try it. Hercule Poisson. Nice to meet you. I am the world's greatest fish detective. Using my large brain, I solve crimes that puzzle the police and perplex the public. This is my associate, Captain Stingray. He has a small brain. I guess he is sometimes helpful when I'm solving cases. Mostly he gets nervous and buries himself in the sand until just his eyeballs are sticking out. But he's good at writing down clues in his notebook, so I let him tag along. Plus, he always compliments me on my shiny gills, so it's clear he has good taste. Not everyone in Tide Town appreciates shiny gills. Shocking, I know. This is Tide Town. From the outside, our little saltwater community might seem a bit boring. Okay, to be honest, most of the time, Tide Town is a snore fest. It's as exciting as watching underwater paint never dry. Some might even ask why I, Hercule Poisson, the world's greatest fish detective, choose to live here. Why don't I move to a big bustling city, like Boston Harbor Bottom or Deep Portland? I'll tell you. Any town can be home to a criminal mastermind. The residents of Tide Town found that out the hard way. And before you picture some nefarious bottom feeder scuttling under a rock or creeping through the kelp, let me tell you, Tide Town's criminal mastermind was hiding in plain sight, like any other citizen, until Hercule Poisson took on the case. Oh, that infamous Tuesday started out innocently enough. In fact, it seemed like an ordinary day under the sea. Nobody had any idea that before the morning tide had turned, the icy fin of crime would strike our peaceful town. Nobody, that is, except me. Captain Stingray and I were taking a leisurely swim down Main Street in search of breakfast at Cafe Alewife. Alewife makes the best algae cakes in the Atlantic. But I felt a shiver in my scales. Something was wrong. Had I forgotten to shine my gills? Hold up, Captain Stingray, I said. I need to study my reflection in this shop window. Your gills look fine, Captain Stingray said. I was astounded. How did you know I wished to examine the appearance of my gills? I asked. Did you discover a secret clue, a hidden code, an anonymous tip? Maybe my brilliant detective skills were starting to rub off on him at last. Captain Stingray sighed. Because you're always looking at your gills, he said. You have the shiniest gills in Tide Town. Can we eat now? I'm hungry. You know there is nothing I enjoy more than breakfast, except sending criminal masterminds up the river, I said. But my large brain is telling me something is amiss around here. I peered at my dashing reflection. Captain Stingray was right. I had remembered to polish my gills. They shone like fancy silver serving trays. I was momentarily stunned by their magnificence. Hercule! Captain Stingray, a voice called. It was Nudibranch. She and Crab were sitting at a table outside Cafe Alewife. You're just in time to join us for breakfast. Ahoy, Captain Stingray called. Come on, HP. You know Alewife makes the best algae cakes around. That was an indisputable fact. Very well, I said. After all, algae cakes are very good for large brains. They're good for hungry tummies, too, Captain Stingray said. When we sat down at Nudibranch and Crab's table, my powers of observation took over. I knew it. Something is out of place, I said. Nudibranch, has your fourth eye gotten the tiniest bit bigger? I don't think so, said Nudibranch, fluttering her feathery appendages. I tapped a fin on the table. Captain Stingray, is that a new necktie? Nope, my associate said. It's the one you gave me last Fishmas. Ah, I knew it looked familiar. Still, I raised one eyebrow. Something is different. Oh, the beautiful blue shell has returned, a voice exclaimed. It was Alewife, bringing a plate of hot algae cakes from the kitchen. Does that fancy shell belong to you, Crab? Captain Stingray asked. It was at that moment I observed a wide, smooth shell in the center of our cafe table. My large brain zapped into action. My thoughts flew as fast as a sailfish. List of facts, I shouted. Captain Stingray, write this down. List of facts. A crab shell, Cancer borealis, is sitting on the table. Unusual shade of blue, more like aquamarine or light teal. Covered in glitter. Crab is looking at it proudly. Crab's grandmother was a famous magician who often wore a glittery blue shell. There is clearly only one conclusion, I said to Alewife. That shell does belong to Crab. It was a gift from his grandmother, Miss Clickers the Astounding. I glanced around to see if everyone were looking at me in awe. They were not. Are you not amazed that I figured out who the shell belonged to? I asked. Well, no, Alewife said. Crab said it was a gift from his grandmother. I blinked. When? When you were making your list of facts, Captain Stingray said. You weren't listening. Ah, I said meaningfully. Detective tip, if you're not sure what to say ah meaningfully. It's a splendid shell, Crab, Nudibranch said. It's one of a kind, Crab said with pride. The blue shell sparkled. It's the most beautiful shell I've ever seen, Alewife said. His eyes were sparkling too. I can't look away. Are you going to wear it to fancy parties? Captain Stingray asked. I would wear it to fancy parties. I'm not sure what to do with it, Crab said. So far I've only brought it out to breakfast. Nudibranch squinted all four of her eyes. I keep telling you, Crab, it's not safe carrying that shell around. You have to be careful. My ears perked up. Why would you say that, Nudibranch? And why are you squinting all four of your eyes so suspiciously? Nudibranch was shocked, or possibly pretending to be shocked. I'm squinting because it's bright this morning and I lost my sunglasses, she said. And I'm just telling Crab that his shell is very special and very sparkly. He wouldn't want it to get stolen. Stolen, I said. I stood up and pointed a fin in her direction. Do you know something you're not telling us? Nudibranch's feathery appendages fluttered in alarm. Of course not, she said. But I wasn't fooled. I was just about to question her further when a terrible scream rang out. Everyone gasped. That sounded like a distressed herring, I said, leaping into action. Captain Stingray, extract yourself. Captain Stingray had buried himself up to his eyeballs. Sorry, HP, he said, shaking the sand off. I was startled. The scream came from inside the cafe, I cried. Let's go. That's the end of chapter 1.
Ooh.
The scream of a distressed herring. So that's what my mom picked out.
I love that story. One of the things that I've learned from Adi is that to love children's. I mean, I've always loved children's books. I've always loved picture books, but everybody likes them. You know, they're not just for kids. Young adult is for many adults read young adult novels. Is that not true, Adi?
Yeah, a huge percentage of YA readership is actual adults.
Yeah.
And a lot of people love middle grade and chapter books too. I mean,
yeah.
that's what this is behind me, pretty much.
Well, it's all about story. It's about telling a good story, and whether it's sort of aimed for young people or for grown people, if it's a good story, it works. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Um, Something that I've noticed about you is that
Yes.
what you do as a writer and as a performer has changed a lot from, the beginning of your career. So like I've undergone some changes in what I'm writing. Like this is my first chapter book.
Hmm.
But you started out writing like serious short stories for grown-ups, and that has evolved not into entirely into kids writing, but you've got a couple picture books out, and your performances and your books look very different than they used to.
Yeah. Well, Adi and I talked sort of about a theme for tonight, and I said, I want to talk about evolution
Mm.
because, and I just had my Social Security birthday and Medicare, and I'm at a point now where I can look back over a few years, and I started out as a serious writer of serious literary fiction, and went to grad school and studied with Tom Williams and others. And my first couple of books were short stories, collections of short stories with small New England presses. But when I went out to read those stories to audiences, because that's what you do when you publish a book, you go and you promote the book. I thought it would be very hard because I had always understood that I was a quiet and shy person. That changed when I was faced with audiences who would listen intently, and who, when you got to a serious part, would quiet right down, and when you got to a thoughtful part, would sort of murmur. When they connected with something, you could hear it in the audience. And I especially liked when they laughed. I just got hooked on sharing work with audiences, and over time, without intention really, i I started to move off the page into storytelling. It took me probably 20 years to say that I was a storyteller, and I'm still not sure that I deserve that title. But I just really love putting the book aside and speaking directly to an audience. there's a there's a saying out of Ghana that I read a few months ago that really sort of encapsulates the way I feel about storytelling, and it goes like this. Um, let's see. This is my story which I have told to you, whether it be sweet or whether it be not sweet. Let some of it go forth, and pray do let some of it come back to me sometime. And that to me is what telling stories is about. You put them out there, whether it's on the page or whether it's in the air only, and they go forth into the world, and then you tell a person that story or share that book with a person, and that person shares the story, and then at some point it comes back. And over time it comes back. And I actually begin my new book that reminds me of a funny story, which is really for me the capstone on my career as a storyteller. I'm not going to stop telling stories, but the last several books that I've had published were really receptacles for stories. They were places to put stories that I had heard, um, on the page, so that they wouldn't be lost. And although they lose a little something, I think sometimes when you put them on the page, I wanted them to be preserved. That's my mission, is to preserve as many as I can. And I'll just start with this. The book begins this way. It says, "Why tell stories?" This book is a memoir, a how-to, and a compendium with more than 500 stories. A lot of them are just 1 or 2 lines long, because you don't have to be long to be good. At a storytelling course for seniors, one of the participants, a woman named Jane Ramsey, introduced herself to me on the first day. She said we'd met before, and I didn't recognize her. The name sounded vaguely familiar. She said, I told you the story about the Cockermouth River. Knocked me over with a feather. It's been at least 10 years since I first heard that story. I've probably told it 300 times. And here before me at this class was Jane Ramsey in the flesh, the woman who had given me that story. And she had come back into my life. It had come full circle. Now, this time around, Jane filled in a few details. The story about the Cockermouth River came from a friend of hers named Neil Davis. He was an elderly man chock full of stories. And as a young woman, she had the presence of mind to listen to his stories and to remember and to pass them on. And she told this story about Neil. She said she'd meet him for coffee. She used to meet him for coffee at his house, but then but that didn't work out as well as meeting on a neutral location. So they would meet at a cafe and have coffee, and he'd tell her stories. And one day she came in out of the rain, and she had an umbrella with her. She shook out her umbrella, and Neil said, he said, that's an awful nice umbrella you got there, Jane. And Jane thanked him, and then he said, where'd you get that umbrella? And she told him, and then he said, how much you pay for that umbrella? And she told him, and he said, would you get me an umbrella like that one? I think I'd like it. And she said she would. And she had no more gotten home from their coffee when the phone rang. And he said, it was Neil. He didn't even introduce himself. He said, Jane, don't get me that umbrella. And she said, why not? He said, I might die. And if I die with that umbrella, I'll have to figure out who to leave it to. Neil did die eventually without the burden of having to figure out who would inherit his umbrella. But his stories live on. And that is why I tell stories. That's why I tell stories. Why do you tell stories, Adi Rule? Transition.
I don't do a lot of live performances, a lot of live readings.
But you tell stories in your books.
Stories into my books, and then they go out into the world, and then I'm on to the next thing. I mean, I think you often get asked the question, like, when did you know you were a writer? I think we're all writers when we're little. We're all storytellers when we're little, and we're all artists when we're little, right? I thought I was going to be on the stage. I thought I was going to be an opera singer, and I did a lot of theater, and part of that was writing a lot of shows. Somehow I was still writing, and then I just was like, maybe I should write a novel, and my first terrible as yet unpublished novel came out of that, and it sort of snowballed from there. And I don't really perform much. I don't sing much anymore. I just do the writing full time. I think you have to, when I'm just here, I mean, it's my job, right? So I sit and do my writing anyway. But if it's something that you're doing when you could be doing anything, if you have to sit there and write stories, I think that's important to pay attention to that voice, right? That city. What?
If you have to sit and write stories,
right?
Somebody makes you do that?
No, like if you feel like you have to write stories,
yeah,
it's not something you can really like pick out of a hat and say, "Oh, writer, okay, I'll do that." I think it has to be a desire on your part, because it's thankless in a lot of ways.
It's what?
It's kind of thankless in a lot of ways.
Not a lot of people say. You don't punch a time clock. You don't get a paycheck. I mean, it's all beginning writers start with just a faith in the story.
Yeah.
I have a story to tell, and by gosh, I'm going to write it down, and maybe somebody will want to read it. It's the ultimate writing on spec. There's no guarantee that anybody else will ever read it, or anybody will publish it, or anybody will read it after it's published. it's a trust. It's a trust. You
I
trust the
think-
process.
yeah,
You trust the story.
you have to
Um,
listen to, you have to write all the stories that speak to you, or more stories than just the one. I mean, I think another pitfall that I see sometimes is people who have, you know, the one story, and you can write a book for 25 years and that's great, but you know, write, if you feel like writing something else, write something else too. The first thing might never be perfect. I
I
always
s-
have a
I
lot
see
of
that in,
practice.
I see that in you. Addie will come to the house, would come downstairs from where she lives, and say, "I've got this idea for for a book, and I'm going to write it, even though I have a deadline for this other book. I need to." And that's what she did with Hercule Poisson. She had a deadline for another book that is in October. Is it the
October,
deadline?
I have a deadline for a young adult novel that's kind of dark and kind of serious and heavy. And we had just gotten into, my husband was on furlough and there was a pandemic and I'm in the apartment and I was just like, I can't write this dark, tragic YA novel right now. I have to write about a fish detective. I can't. And it helped. I'm back into that other novel now too.
But
It's,
it's what you wrote, what you needed to write at the time. I mean, there are things that we need to write. And I find that with essays too, that, I mean, I love deadlines, I love getting assignments, but
yeah,
there's a subject that you want to write about. There's a
yeah.
subject that you need to write about. And if you open yourself up to that, to the process, it'll come out. This book I worked on for a very long time before I found a way to tell it. I mean, it really is sort of, it is memoir. It's a story of my life as a storyteller, which is a long one. There's a lot, but how do I tell that? How do I fit it together? And once I figured out that, first of all, it's not the story of my whole life. It's the story of my life in in telling stories, and that evolution, and that there might be some things that I have figured out over time that people who want to tell stories or want to write stories would like to know, so it's instructive. And then, of course, as a place to put all those wonderful stories that people have told me over the years. Once I figured out that structure, then I could write it. But I had to write it. I had to write it before I could move on to something else. And now, thanks to the pandemic, since I'm not telling stories anymore for a while, I'm writing, wait for it, a novel.
Woo! I'm
I've
so
never,
excited about your novel.
huh?
I'm so excited about your novel.
I've always said I could no more write a novel than build a barn, because I'm small. I'm a miniaturist. I write small.
Mm.
I write small. Even this big fat book is made up of a lot of little pieces. Um, but I'm trying, because now I have the time. I'm not going out. A wise friend of mine, Marie Harris, once said, I said, I don't understand it. I can't seem to get much writing done. She said, well, you're out 4 nights a week telling stories.
Right.
You can't go out and in at the same time. You can't be out there and then go inside at the same time. So there's been a lot of time. I'm sorry, I'm getting an allergy. It's wonderful being outdoors in pollen season, isn't it? Delightful. Um, I have this time to just sit, and I've been writing an hour, 2, 3, or 4 a day since the beginning of the pandemic. And gosh, you get a lot of words. You get a lot of words, and I'm really trying to build a foundation. I think I'm at the walls now of this barn that I'm building, that I never thought I could, but I'm giving it a try. Inspired by Miss Addie Rule, who is a novelist by nature.
Well, it's funny. I mean, when we are talking about what we're working on in writers group, I think we've ended up having sort of a similar process of writing novels. You know, everybody writes novels differently, but the way that I do it, and I think the way that you do it, is we start at the beginning and go ahead a little bit, and then go back, and then
Cursive, yeah.
cursively, and then go forward a little bit more, and then go back, and then go forward a little bit more. Some people will do a whole draft that's real messy, and then go back and refine from there. You know, there's no wrong way to write a novel, but it's just funny that I think we're the same type of writer in that way, even though we write really different
Yeah. Well,
stuff.
it's the way I've always written essays and short stories. I write a line, and then the next day I write another line. Then I go back and revise the first line.
Right.
And if you're writing something that's 600 words, that works pretty well. But when you're writing something that's 300 pages, it's a lot to hold it all in your head.
It
But
is.
because of this quarantine, at last I have the time and the space to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful. And also it's a mystery. So I know it has an end.
Have you
Somebody, and
had-
I know it has a beginning, somebody gets killed,
Do you
and
know
then and somebody did it, and then in the end we found out who did it. Done.
You got to know those things, though. You have to decide who dies and who doesn't.
Valerie knows, people in our writing group know I keep changing my mind about who's going to die, because I get very attached to them when I write about them. And I say, oh, I don't want you to die. You're way too interesting. I'll kill this other fellow over here. But I think now I know.
But what happens is when you finally get to the end, it's not a first draft. It's sort of almost there when you finally. So instead of doing multiple drafts of something, it's like this very slow. My friend Erin Moulton, who's a fantastic writer, and I have this saying where we say we're oozing towards greatness. You just ooze
Oozing.
at a time. There's no
It's
skyrocketing.
one brick at a time, and then you put 3 bricks up and take 2 down, and then try again. Yeah, but it's a wonderful process, and in part because I have seen Adi write these books. I see her sit there and churn out these drafts.
Drink a Red
And
Bull.
I've read all your books. I do. I usually read them after they're published, but she sits there and she plows through. She plows through. So, and I think, you can say if this is true or not, Adi. And Adi's father is an engineer, and he's always had like a job and insurance, things like that. And she was very good in math and science. She could have been an engineer, but she chose to be a writer. And I'm not sure why she did that exactly, but did it help to grow up in a house with a writer?
Yeah, it helped because I think that, and I'm not knocking this mindset because I think it's cool, but there's this sort of mystique about writing, I think sometimes, that you have the muse and you have to be in this place and you bring your typewriter to Starbucks and you do all these things. But when I was growing up, and that's good too, however you write your stuff is good, but when I was growing up, it was you and it was everybody that was surrounding us. It was a job. It was just like my dad went to work at the shipyard and my mom went in the study, and that was the job. And you put your butt in the chair at your desk and you write your stuff. And, that's sort of how I approach it now, is like, I don't always feel it. And some days I don't come out with anything that's too great, but I'm very consistent. I do treat it like a job. It doesn't have that sort of almost untouchable, magical sort of feeling that the stars have to be aligned in order for you to write this novel. Like you can work on it and keep working it like a sculptor. So I think it did help. And we would go to people's readings when I was a kid, right? And sometimes there would be a room full of people, and sometimes there would be 2 people, and that's how it is. It wasn't shocking to me.
You were surrounded. The first time you went to a bookstore to do a reading and nobody came,
Oh,
it was okay.
prepared. The first time I did a reading at a bookstore and someone did come, it was like, oh my gosh, I did it. Here I am. There's a person here.
I want to tell this story about when Adi was growing up. I have just the one child. That's all I could handle. But when she was growing up, I was very protective of my writing time. And when she went to school, woo, I had all these hours that she was in school that I could write, and I did. Um, and I remember one day the nurse called from school. Do you remember this, Addie?
Ew,
And
yeah.
said, and said, Becky, Addie's sick. Can you come and get her? And I said, how sick is she?
Is she?
Because I didn't want to go get her, but I did.
Did you? 'Cause I
I,
don't remember. She probably left me in the nurse's office all day.
I think I did. But when you've got a lot going on in your life, that time to write. I know there are a lot of writers in this group. I see you. That it's very precious and guarded and needs to be protected. But
Yeah, you have to protect that time. I hear a lot of people say I don't have time to write, and that's true. And you know, if you work a full-time job and you have the kids, or you do all this stuff, and you really don't. But
I'm frozen.
What? Did I freeze? Am I frozen? No. Is my mom frozen? I can't tell.
Your mom might be frozen.
Okay.
Oh, I'm back. Am I back?
Yes.
I froze. I think, should we open it up to questions and comments and
Sure.
anybody?
I can't see everybody, I don't think. But
Yeah.
So everybody can unmute. Are you all unmuted?
One person.
I like your cat.
Oh.
The orange cat. He's awesome.
You're not on here. See, I have it. You see, I have it shut off. See where it says Bob Irving?
No.
This is the dangerous part.
If I didn't, if it wasn't black, it would look like one of these.
Here's the humor.
So
Hear the humor?
Facing you, but I don't.
So I hit the unmute all button, but if you're not unmuted, you can unmute yourself, I think.
I'm gonna turn the page.
Well, unmute
Becky?
all.
Oh, there's a lot of people on here that aren't.
Becky, having been a relatively new member of your writers group, and we have different prompts that we write to if we want, I
Yes.
certainly enjoyed it. The prompts give me a chance to think of things that I want to write in a different perspective.
Mm.
So I'm so glad I'm a part of the writers group.
I'm glad you're part of it too. I met Valerie at a storytelling class that I did in Durham. And towards the end of the class, we started talking about writing, and she came and joined our writing group in Northwood, which has been going on for some time. And every week we have a prompt or a series of prompts that we come up with together, usually based on something in somebody's story. We'll say, let's write about, I can't remember any of them now. Can you remember any, Valerie?
Saturation.
Saturation. Last week we talked about saturation, becoming saturated. So a lot of people in the group for this Tuesday will write something about saturation, and we read to each other, and then we share work in progress. And if somebody has a specific question about the work, the group will respond to that. And I've done that. Is this funny?
Yeah.
And what's funny or what's not funny? Do you understand this? And so we do give feedback, but a lot of it is just sharing of the work, that kind of that the community that we have. And we've really gotten to know each other pretty well just from reading each other's work. We don't go to each other's houses, we don't hang out, but we read each other's work. And in that way, you can get to know people pretty darned well.
Talk too much about community, but I think it's important. I think a writing community is important because it's such a solitary activity. So it's good to have, a little support network of, if it's your classmates or your friends or a town writing group, or
just one other person that you share your work with. Yeah. Editors are nice. I like editors.
They're fine.
They make your work better.
They do make your work better.
Yeah. Well, Addie does something which I don't do. she she meets with her groups in person, used to, online now, and they don't even talk, they just write at the same
Very
time.
now.
B.
She's
Why
in
is she?
our group.
I didn't see
Awesome.
her.
So it's like
We're still
in
unmuted.
one
So
we'll meet at a
can you
coffee
unmute us
shop,
again?
sit there and coffee and write. But during the pandemic, we meet up
People
too,
don't know how to do a mute. Some guy's talking in the back. He doesn't know.
and we just
Very angle.
we do our writing session with the Zoom on, so it's like we're all staring at each other while we're writing.
But the pressure is on because you all have to write.
Because there's eyeballs there.
Yeah.
Doing their own thing. I'm like, I go on Facebook and I'm like, don't go on
I
Facebook.
went to the house with my phone.
They'll know.
Yeah. Yeah. In the end, we all write by ourselves, but there is a community in each part of the process. In the
Yeah.
beginning of the process, when you're excited to talk about it and say, I've got this idea for this fish detective. Oh, that sounds like a great idea to me. I think anybody would want to read that. Yeah, somebody had a question. Hi.
I do. I just want to make a comment to Audie that when you're writing for children or young people, if you're writing and expecting the parents or somebody else to read it to the child, then your first chapter was perfect because it entertains the adult as well as the child, and you're teaching humor and what's funny and what's not funny and what's you explained that this, when you say fish detective, my mind goes to someone who is a detective of fish. But you have a fish that is a detective, and
Yeah.
so it's a play on words, and it's great for the adults as well as the kids, and that's a great first chapter.
Oh, thank you so much.
I agree. It makes me laugh so much, that first chapter.
Yeah,
There's something that Roald Dahl said about writing for kids, and he said when you write for adults, which is what I usually do, teenagers or adults, that you write for someone who's going to read the book once, maybe twice, but kids will read a book 25 times. I mean,
Yeah. They have to stand up.
learning about humor too. I mean, I learned everything I knew from Bunnicula and from Roald Dahl and from books like that. So that means a lot to hear you say that. Thanks.
yeah.
Is it Dorothy had a question or a comment?
Yeah, yes. Your first chapter I found fascinating. So I'm thinking, really, what is the age? I love Hercule Poirot, and I also love Hercule Poisson.
A lot of
I'm
people sitting on there.
I mean, the parent reading it with the kid. I mean, are the
Mothers and
children going to
daughters.
make the connection with Poirot, or
I
I mean,
don't think
it's
they need to
so
necessarily.
many
A lot of people
levels.
are
There's
watching
so
through
many
their
levels in
portraits.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think little kids won't make the connection to
It's
Poirot.
appropriate because it's a mother and daughter.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of myself because, I would watch him and my children were around.
Yeah.
So maybe they knew the TV was on, and so they'll say, Mama, look at that.
Hercule Poirot.
Yeah.
I think the best books for kids are also really appealing to adults. We still read them as adults, and enjoy them.
I've heard a lot of children's authors say, and I think I would say this too, is that we write not necessarily for some concept of a kid that is existing right now, but for ourselves when we were that age. So we write things that we would have enjoyed, when we were 6 or 8 or 12 or 15 and I think having a little bit of that adult sensibility in there makes it a little bit more exciting for the parents too.
Well, yeah.
Hopefully.
Well, it's very, very sophisticated, I found.
And I think it's good that you don't not talk down to kids, but treat them like your first chapter is on the what am I trying to say? I guess I just mean that like the words you use and the phrasing is not like you're not talking down to them.
Hmm.
I think that's important, right? Like,
Yeah.
I learned a lot of words from books when I was a kid. I remember learning
Yes.
the word posthumously from Bunnicula, 7 years old. What does posthumously mean?
And then you look it up, and then you know that word.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote a picture book about sledding, and on
Yeah.
the last page, I talk about them careening down a hill. And I've had adults say, would kids know that word? And I'm like, well, they will if they read this book.
They
'Cause
know it now.
it's a great word, careening. And
It
it's a
is.
word, and even whether you're 3 or 4 or 5, when you hear that word read by an adult, maybe an adult that you love, and you hear them say that word about kids sliding on thick crust and going really, really fast, and they're careening, then that word has meaning. So,
Yeah.
I wanted to use that word.
I think the
I
best
fought for that word.
have those layers, and Icy Dicey is definitely one of those picture books that has all of those layers in it. It has that nostalgic feeling that kids might not necessarily get. Adults definitely will.
I would like to write more picture books, but they're really hard to
Super
write.
hard.
It's
Yeah.
it's a really hard market, and it's really hard to get just the right story with the right pace that's fresh and original. And when I started out as a writer, I wanted to do 2 things: publish a collection of short stories and publish a children's picture book, because I love picture books so much, and I think that picture book art is some of the greatest art that we have. And it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago that I was able to publish my first picture book. And I've taken it to schools, and I've taken it to, I read it at a memory care facility, Alzheimer's patients. I read that picture book to them, and they loved it.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, I invited people to tell stories, and they were all sitting in a circle in a big room, and I read this sledding story, and they started telling stories about sledding when they were kids. And then one woman who didn't speak very much, it was very hard for her to get the words out, but she managed to say, "When I was a child, I was happy."
Oh,
And that
oh.
made me happy. And
Wow.
that's what stories can do. They can connect people. And she connected with that book, and she connected with me and everybody else in the room with just those few words that were so hard for her to get out. But she had a feeling, and she was able to express it. That's why I write. Moments like that.
So I saw Ruby had her hand raised. Did you have a question?
Oh, yes, I do. I want to apologize for not having my video on because I have a really bad hair.
Bad haircut. Please join the club. I'm sitting in the dark now, and I'm much better.
Hair this long. This is
I look like I just got out of prison. That's pretty good.
Tom, could you come shine a light on me? I'm in the dark out here.
So I had a comment for Addie and a question for Becky. So Addie, my comment is about the fish detective. I really love the part, he and his skate buddy are swimming down the street. And I just thought that's such a great image. And it's a great, because fish don't walk, and yet you have them moving like they're people. I just thought that was a really great, a great picture in my head. So thanks for that. And for Rebecca, the story about the berries, I feel like I really must speak up because you left out elderberries.
Thank you for that.
I feel like really dissed by that. actually my
You know,
favorite.
Ruby, that is the nature of storytelling. Always stories get corrected. And so that in the next telling,
Yeah.
I mean, that is the tradition of storytelling.
Yeah.
And I heard this, I read this somewhere, that in Ireland, when they would have storytelling sessions, they would all sit and tell the same story. And then they would pick the best one to
Oh,
pass
that's
on.
great. Oh, that's
Yeah.
a great idea.
So
Wow.
there's the notion that in stories we want to get things right, and we have all of history to draw from, and all of the future to make them better and more accurate.
No, I don't know how to turn it down.
So do you pick elderberries?
No, but I probably should. Isn't elderberry like a little black seedy blueberry?
You know, you don't need to know about them.
No. Now I have to find out.
There's not quite enough of them for everybody.
Oh,
Very
I see.
proprietary about elderberry patches. We spend all spring spotting them all over this, the
Are
area.
they small and black? Are they like small blueberries and they're very seedy?
Yes.
Yes, I have picked those. I didn't know the name for them,
Yeah.
but they're really quite wonderful.
So we spot them in the springtime because that's when you can really see them because of their flowers.
Yeah.
And then we wait and we kind of, keep checking because they're always on the roadside. So you can spot them from a moving car.
Yeah.
And then when you see the fruit get ready, then you pounce, because the birds get them or other people get them.
Well, that's the thing. The birds are always getting them.
Yeah. Well, people are pretty bad too. And you can tell it's been people because everything's all busted up.
I know.
So one year I saw this patch and I was hovering over it and I was ready to strike and somebody had gotten there before me.
Oh my
And I was
God.
mad for the whole year. I kept cussing that person who got there ahead of me. And then the next year when I went to pick them, there was this guy there picking and I screeched the car to a halt and I raced over there to, I was gonna punch him in the nose. It turns out it was someone I knew. Turns out it hadn't been him the year before picking there.
Yeah.
So punch somebody in the nose for nothing.
Well, you see, that's storytelling. One story leads to another. We had a question. I see a question, a hand raised.
Thank you.
Thanks,
go?
Ruby.
Can I go?
I see
Jim. Oh, goody. Wait a minute. I'm not a writer, but I'm a consumer of humor. And I love stand-up comedians for their storytelling abilities. And I want to share with this group, there's a man named Justin McKinney. He's over on the Seacoast. He's a stand-up comedian. He does the music hall. He does the Palace. He's out on tour. If you get a chance to see him, he can tell great stories. But back to Rebecca. I got turned on to her from her accents. I grew up in Pennsylvania. When I came up here and starting to hear these Yankee accents, it freaked me out. So when I saw Rebecca giving her shows, my jaw was down. So I love, when she goes into that mode, she goes into that, storytelling mode. So I love you, Becky. Keep going. Keep going.
Thank you very much. Yankee humor. It's my speciality.
Me too. I was always the class clown. I was always getting in trouble. So it plays right in there. Humor. I love the humor.
Well, humor has been humor. When it's working. It's it's either works or it doesn't, and you can tell. And sometimes when it doesn't work, that's really funny also.
But your humor is so it runs through the whole story. I love your humor. It doesn't just have a punchline. It just carries you through it. So it's a lilting thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's great to hear. Great to hear. Anybody else have a question or a comment? Am I frozen again? Oh no, I'm still here.
You're still there.
Dark. Do you have a light there, Mom?
Yeah, John, could you bring a light out? Because I could go inside. Oh wait, I don't clean my house, because I'm busy writing. So we won't be going inside. Could you bring a flashlight out and shine it upon me? Thank you, dear.
Like Halloween.
Nobody cleans their house during COVID.
Bye.
I can't do it all. I can't do it all. Oh, here he comes. Oh, that's nice, John. Now I have a light.
There you go.
There we go. Any closing remarks, Adi?
Kathy had a question.
Oh, Kathy had a question.
Oh,
That's
you're
not
on-
good. Oh, that's good.
That's terrifying.
Just okay. Kathy had a question.
I don't have a question. I have a comment to Becky that I am the wife of the story that you sometimes tell about "'Twould have been better if it were Baldwin's." And
Oh, Fred. Is it Fred?
if Fred were here, he would be very pleased that you have taken his story to a new level.
And it's in this book,
Oh,
I think. Oh, Fred Creed. Oh my gosh, from Warner. I spent some time with the two of you and
Yeah.
heard a lot of good stories.
yeah.
And the story is that it's the story of don't ask a Yankee a question if you don't expect an honest answer. And who was it made a pie? You tell it, Kathy.
Oh, well, my husband's brother was in an iron lung. He had polio, and his lady friend made a pie for him, and she had to feed it to him because he couldn't feed it himself. And she's not a cook, so he ate the pie, and then she said, "Well, how did you like it?" And he said, "'Twould have been better if you used Baldwin's." and she left at that point.
It's a great apple pie story.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
great apple pie story.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like the story of the guy of the lady in Wilmot who took a casserole up to her neighbor. She heard he was poorly, and brought some macaroni and cheese up to him. Went back the next week to collect her dish, and made the mistake of saying, "How did you like it?" And he said, "'Twant up to Wilmot standards." You just don't ask those questions. And I heard that story from the lady, so I know it was a true story. It's legendary in Wilmot. "'Twant up to Wilmot standards." Anybody else have a question or a comment? I think we're done.
Thank you.
Can I end this? I will end with my little saying. This is my story, which I have told to you, whether it be sweet or whether it be not sweet. Let it go forth and pray. Sometime let it come back to me. Adi, do you have anything to say?
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
That was fun. That was
It was fun.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
See
you,
you
everyone.
Tuesday.
See you Tuesday, Valerie.